Hello and welcome. My name is Susan Kotke, along with Russ Battaglia. Our third team member, Rashida Lawrence, is unable to be present with us today. This interview with Professor Jerry Kozlowski is a part of our Leadership Symposium for the MOL 630 Organizational Leadership Capstone at Medaille College. We are interviewing Professor Kozlowski for the purpose of gathering an executive's perspective on decision-making in a leadership role. Russ and I will be alternating the questions. Jerry, why don't you give us a bit about your background?
Certainly. First of all, I'd like to say it's a pleasure and an honor to be here and to be asked to do this, so thank you very much. A little bit about me. I'm born and raised in the Buffalo area. Did well in school and always wanted to be an emergency room physician. Started to go to UB to go to med school, ran out of money. This was back in the late 60s. And as soon as I left school to try to get a job to make some more money for tuition, I got drafted. Rather than run away like some people were doing back in the 60s, I decided to not go to the Army but join the Air Force. My intentions were to spend my 4 years, learn a trade, come back to Western New York, marry my high school sweetheart, and live happily ever after. But we know through decision making, which I'll talk about in a moment, as well as fate, that doesn't always turn out that way. I started out as a Russian linguist, interpreter in the Air Force. I speak 3 languages fluently. And shortly after that, I ended up in Southeast Asia. So that shows you how smart I was. While in Southeast Asia, I had some difficult times. I lost a couple of really close friends, and I made some decisions on the battlefield that I was going to dedicate my life to the military and make a career out of it. Came back stateside, finished my undergraduate degree, and became an officer in 1980. It was during officer training school that I really learned that there were formal processes to be made in decision making, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. After a 25-year career on active duty, I came back to Western New York. Our families are both back from this area. I decided to go back into teaching. I've been teaching for many years while I was a military officer. I taught for a couple of colleges and universities in the local area and started with Medaille College in 2000, so I've been with Medaille now for 14 years. It's a very interesting school. I'll talk about some decision-making policies too when I talk about Medaille in a little bit. I ended up getting my SUNY professorship at Genesee Community College, where I serve as the dean of 2 major departments, also vice president of workforce development at Genesee Community College. I retired from full-time work for the second time in January of last year. During my last year at GCC, I was selected by Governor Cuomo to serve on the Finger Lakes Regional Economic Development Council, which I did. I was also Chamber of the Board for the Genesee County Chamber of Commerce for a year, which was quite a distinction for me as I went along. So I do have a background in decision-making, and I've led organizations as small as 6 or 8 people. The largest organization I was ever in charge of was just over 3,000 people while I was in the Air Force. So I've been around the world many times. I've been around the block. I've been on this earth for almost 63 years, and I think I have a little bit of a background on how to make better decisions, really, and that's one of the reasons I teach MOL 626 in decision making for this fine college.
Okay, Jerry, this is Russ, and I'm going to ask the first question. Have you always used a decision-making process, or is that something you learned along your career?
Yeah, that's a great question, too. But I can tell you that while I was a young guy, I made a lot of mistakes like a lot of young people do. And the reason I did, as I study and ponder my background, is because I didn't have a process to follow. As I just told you, when I went through officer training school in 1980, one of the things they talk about and make a big deal about is the ability to make sound decisions. And as a result of officer training school, being an officer for all those years, I was also in charge at the United States Air Force Academy of the Leadership School for about 18 months. While I was there, I used my ability to meet a lot of people to interview successful leaders. I've interviewed over 1,000 successful leaders, from presidents of the United States to senators and congressmen to heads of state from all around the world, as well as CEOs and high-ranking military officers, to include General Colin Powell. And I'm compiling a book right now. I'm writing 3 books. One of them has to do with decision making, and I'm taking what I've learned from all these leaders and all the interviews I've given to compile a book that I think is rather unique. Now, one of the things I do with my my traditional on-ground classes is hand them out a worksheet called How to Make Better Decisions. And in that worksheet is my process, the way I like to solve big decisions. And that's by using 6 steps and by referring to something called Category 1 and Category 2 decisions, and a little bit of tongue-in-cheek called Kozlowskiisms that I compiled along the way that help my students, friends, and family make better decisions along the way. The first thing you need to understand is, and that a lot of people don't ever really ponder and consider, is after all the research I've done and after all the people I've interviewed over the years, that there basically are 2 flavors or kinds of decisions to be made out there in the world. And we make decisions every single day. From the moment we wake up to the moment we go to bed at night, we are constantly making decisions. Now, a lot of times we don't sit and consider that, but in fact we really do. And along the way, some of my colleagues and I have come up with this notion of Category 1 and Category 2, which I think really helped my students as well as my own life and the people that I care about make better big decisions. Category 1 decisions are routine decisions. They're decisions that you make when you wake up, like what cereal am I going to have for breakfast this morning? Or what color shirt am I going to put on? Or what's my tie going to look like before I jump in the car and go to work? Category 1 decisions are routine decisions. They're normally recurring decisions. They're normally the kind of decisions that the majority of us make every single day of our life. And the important thing to understand about Category 1 decisions is that if you make a mistake with a Category 1, there usually aren't any far-reaching consequences. If you have Cocoa Puffs versus wheat cereal this morning, probably not a big deal. If you wear a red shirt versus a white shirt, probably not a big deal. The big deal comes along with inability to make sound Category 2 decisions. Category 2 decisions are the big decisions. They're the ones that typically are non-recurring. They're the ones that make us or break us as people in our private lives as well as professionals as we climb the corporate ladder, so to speak, and get into rarefied air. They're the ones that make front page news. They're the ones that make the leading story in the newspaper and on TV. And I'm here to tell you for the next few minutes that it's all about making sound Category 2 decisions. If you ask me, from my humble opinion, what the keys to success of a leader is, it is his or her ability to consistently make sound Category 2 decisions. Category 2 decisions are, will I get married to her or not? Category 2 decisions are, will I accept the motion? Will I make a major career change? Will I get into the car after having 5 drinks downtown? Those are Category 2 decisions that affect your life directly and can certainly affect the lives of others along the way. So it's important for you to understand the difference between Category 1s and Category 2s, because I'll be referring to Category 2s throughout the rest of my interview. Now, what you need to do is realize that when you recognize you're making a Category 2 decision, you need to understand that, I hope I'm connected. I hope this one says something went wrong, try to reconnect. So I'm going to keep going. It's important to recognize that when you are making decisions to make the distinction between Cat 1 and Cat 2, if you understand that what you are going to decide on is a Category 2 decision, I would highly suggest and recommend you use some prescribed methodology to make that decision. And I've come up with 6 steps. I've borrowed some of them from other authors, and I'm certainly using them in my book. But very quickly, I want to go through them. And it is one of many, and in MOL 626, we showed you lots of different ways to get to Pittsburgh, so to speak, and make a Category 2 decision. So as far as deciding how to decide, the 6 steps are: 1, to define the problem or issue. Lots of people go wrong right in the first step. They have a tendency to move too quickly, and rather than define the true problem or issue to make the decision, they are defining a symptom to the problem or issue. So when all possible, you want to slow down there. Step 2 is to search for alternatives. 3 is to compare and evaluate the alternatives. 4 is to choose one, and a lot of people are afraid to do that, and that's actually make the decision. 5 is to implement the decision. And finally, one that lots of executives don't do is follow up and tweak after you've actually made the Category 2 decision itself. Then I have something called Kozlowskiisms, which I'll talk about for the remainder of my interview.
Well, Jerry, you certainly established that you have an extensive background. When working with or in a business team and you offer your decision-making tools, your strategies, your advice, do you get any resistance from others?
Yeah, it happens all the time, and I can tell you a whole lot of stories about getting resistance. That's something that you should expect. You should expect conflict, especially once you hit the director or vice president level and above in your leadership roles. You really don't want to work for an organization, at least I don't, that everyone rolls over and agrees with everything you say all the time, especially as you increase in rank. While I was ordained in a vice president at a college, for example, as well as a senior military officer, I encouraged people on my team to speak up and disagree. Then after you've come to some conclusion and you've solved and went through the 6 steps of the Category 2 effort, that's the time everybody needs to line up real promptly and then follow the decision and not be someone who backs up. Yeah, it happens all the time, and once again, it should be expected to happen. As a matter of fact, I can remember a time, quite a few years ago, right after I got out of the Air Force and became an executive with Tops Markets. I can remember very distinctly, it was August of 1999. And those of you who have a couple of birthday candles under their belt remember what was going on in the mid and later portion of 1999, and that was an effort and a focus on Y2K. Y2K, to refresh your memory, was the smart people and IT guys and gals alike were all worried about what was going to happen when the clock struck 12 in the year 2000, and computers weren't going to be able to handle the load of what was happening in Y2K. Obviously, being part of a $4 billion company called Tops Markets, we were concerned what was going to happen to our cash registers, what was going to happen to our computer systems. There was lots of rumor and propaganda, fear going on at the time. And I can remember distinctly, to answer your question, Susan, what was going on in the corporate conference room during August and September of that year. There were some of my colleagues on the board of 13 executive committee members who thought this might be a wonderful opportunity to get well profit-wise. We knew, for example, that because of the fear going on with Y2K, lots of our customers were going to do something called pantry load, which is a term that's used in supermarket businesses throughout the country. Pantry loading means having something on sale or having something that housewives and people who buy supermarket items buy in mass quantities because of the sale or because of fear. We knew people were going to buy mass quantities of canned foods. We knew they were going to buy batteries, and we knew they were going to buy water. There were rumors going around in Y2K, and it sounds humorous right now, that at the stroke of 12, gas stations weren't going to be able to pump gas anymore. Some people actually thought water wasn't going to come out of the tap because the water companies and the electric companies were going to be negatively affected. And people certainly thought that supermarkets were going to be down for an extended period of time because they didn't have electricity and power and those sorts of things, and they wanted food. So we knew in at least those 3 categories that people were going to pantry load. Some of my colleagues on the executive committee at Tops, and by the way, it's not just Tops. I know Danny Wegman, and I've talked about this to him, and they thought the same thing at Wegmans. Some of my colleagues thought, what a great opportunity to raise the price of canned goods, batteries and water, for example, at just a few cents, and be able to get really, really strong results in our fourth quarter for 1999 that would carry us off well into the year 2000. There were others of us on the board, though, who said we should be thinking about doing the exact opposite. And we should be thinking about our customer and think about the goodwill we could extend if, in fact, we did not raise the prices, but actually lowered the prices and made a big deal about it. And after considerable debate, and to answer your question, Susan, is there times where you sit down and try to show your point of view on a Category 2 decision and people strike back at you? That was one case that really strikes out at me. And after considerable deliberation, we had an MBA who became a new CEO of the company right before this happened. I'm happy to say that our side won. We, in fact, lowered the price. We had something called a Cantastic sale in October where we sold canned foods after making a deal with the Del Montes and other folks of the world to sell canned goods at a radically reduced discount. And then in November, we sold batteries, made deals with Eveready and Duracell and others to sell at a cheaper price, and then the big deal was water. People have to have water. People are very fearful of water, and they're actually filling their basements and their homes with bottled water. As a matter of fact, we had to hire on part-time people, part-time kids, just to go back and forth from the warehouse right near the end of the year to fill the water shelves. That's how quickly it was going off the shelves. Now, did we lose any money? Maybe a few cents, but I can tell you what we gained afterwards. In January and February of that year, the mail, the phone calls, and the personal visits were just astounding. Our customers and other customers came and shopped at Tops and patted us on the head and the back, saying, you could have gouged us, you could have taken advantage of us, in fact, you didn't. And that was just one example of many examples that you as leaders, future executives, are going to have to contend with when it comes to making Category 2 decisions in the business environment.
Okay, I have a two-part question. Many times in business, decisions you are making today should have been made yesterday. How do you slow down the fast-moving train and use the process when the boss wants it now? And have you ever had to make that decision before you had all the data you wanted? Can you give us an example?
Sure, and I'll assume, Russ, that you're referring predominantly to Category 2, because those are the ones that,
Correct.
we get paid the big bucks to do as executives. You know, the first thing I would say is a caveat. You know, you are about to earn your graduate school degrees, and congratulations for that. That degree is going to open up a lot of doors if you know how to use that tool properly. But I can tell you right now, as you search for a new job, a new profession, a new career, one of the things I would highly advise you to watch closely is if you land in an organization where they're constantly making Category 2s under time constraints and pressure, you might want to start thinking about finding a new job. I can tell you right now, after being a part of many successful as well as unsuccessful organizations, predominantly those teams, those CEOs and those executive teams that consistently feel under the gun to make high-pressure Category 2 decisions are the ones where the organization fails, or where the stress and anxiety levels are so high that it's just not worth $100,000 or $150,000 in salary to stay there. So the first thing I would say to you is, yes, I certainly have been. All executives have been in situations where you have to make Category 2 decisions quickly or suffer the consequences. But let me give you an example. If you're in a war situation, and I'm a 25-year active duty military officer, if you're in a war situation, and that I would say is a Category 2, lots of Category 2 decisions are being made in a wartime environment when people are shooting at you. If Sarge says duck, that's Category 2. That's not a time to say, well, let's sit and think about this and run through 6 steps to see whether I should duck or not. That's a Category 2 decision. Sarge says duck, you duck. And then you can talk about it later. But what I'm here to tell you that more often than not, people put undue pressure on themselves during a Category 2 type decision and try to make the decision quickly when in fact they have all the time in the world. As a matter of fact, this is deviating just a bit from your question, but some advice I want to give to anyone who's willing to listen to me, and that is from this point on in your lives, when your boss asks you to do something for him or her, you should say, now to make certain not only that you understand what needs to be done, but ask your boss, when do you need this by? More often than not, the boss doesn't need it for a week or 2 weeks or a month. But what happens to the typical employee who wants to succeed and is an overachiever? You're going to typically drop everything else you have on your plate, which might be more important to the organization and your boss, and do what your boss has to do when in fact it may not be something that needs to be done right away. So the first thing I would say to you is, yes, I've been in that situation. 2, observe closely what's going on and make certain that's not happening all the time. Sometimes the external and internal environment just forces you to make Category 2 decisions without all the information, without having an opportunity. But I'm here to tell you right now, I dare you to tell me one Category 2 other than Sarge yelling duck, where a Category 2 decision in your personal or your professional life that you can't give a couple of hours to and follow the 6 steps and figure out, am I defining the problem correctly? What are my potential alternatives? And which one is the best one to select to make the decision, even in high-pressure situations. And if I have time, I'll tell some stories about that in a little bit.
Thank you.
Jerry, it seems to be easier to make a bad choice rather than a good one. Why do you think organizations often get it wrong?
Yeah, they often get it wrong because A, they're rushing the problem, they're rushing the decision. They are attempting to try to shoot off the hip. Lots of times organizations, CEOs alike, just because you're a CEO and vice president doesn't mean you've learned this before and have using this in your career. People go wrong and people rush because of A, misconception and misperceived timelines, and B, because they don't follow some prescribed methodology. Once again, I like my 6 steps, but it doesn't matter what methodology you use as long as you slow down, try to get help when you need help, and to strip out negative emotion. And by that I mean, and it's something important, anytime you're making a Category 2 decision, there's going to be emotion involved. We're human beings. We're emotional human things. And there's always going to be emotion involved. Something you really need to understand when you're making a Category 2 decision, and I'll tell you, if you look at it in your own personal lives, and you look at the lives of others who have a gray cloud over their head, I can tell you right now, 99 out of 100 times, they were making poor Category 2 decisions because they were making them when they were negatively emotionally charged. They were upset. They were angry. They were not healthy. That's what I mean by negatively emotionally charged. We're all going to make Category 2 decisions while we're emotionally charged. But if you're crying, if you're angry, if you're pounding on the desk, if you're upset, if you're throwing things, or in an environment where your boss is doing that or those around you are doing that, my advice to you is, if it's truly a Category 2, the first thing you need to do is calm everybody down before you start running the steps, defining the problem, alternatives, etc. So you need to once again be certain that negative emotion is not wrapped around you making that Category 2 decision.
Okay, in summary, as future leaders, what advice do you have for our cohort members about decision making?
Well, the first thing I'd like to do is say, my students always ask me, and those who I try to preach about Category 1, Category 2, and how to make better decisions, they constantly ask me, do you actually follow the 6 steps? And the answer to that is true. I'm going to give you some advice right now that I give my traditional on-ground students. Throughout the 7 weeks I'm with them, I tell them to take little 3x5 cards and actually put the 6 steps or whatever other, you don't have to use mine once again, whatever other methodology you want to use, write them on 3x5 cards, and it sounds hokey, but tape it to the bathroom mirror. So when you get up in the morning, you're refreshing your memory that if in fact today I do have a Category 2 decision to make, I need to slow down and to realize and understand that I need to follow some methodology, whether it's a 6 steps or not. I would also suggest that you write these down and put them wherever you work, whether it's on near your phone or on the wall or wherever you are where you're making daily decisions. Once again, to constantly remind yourself that if in fact what I need to do is make a Category 2 decision, I'm going to stop for a moment, pause before I pull the trigger, and I'm going to say I need to follow some methodology, in this case the 6 steps. So the first thing I'd like to offer you is, regardless of how you want to go about doing it, and there's dozens and dozens of different ways to follow a methodology for a Category 2. Write them down, and until you have them committed to memory, put them in places where you're constantly reminded by them. I can tell you to this day, at the ripe old age of almost 63 years on this earth, I don't have the 6 steps on my bathroom mirror anymore. I don't have them posted at my office because I know about them and I follow them religiously. What I do, though, is when I do have to make a decision, to this day I ask myself, is this a Cat 1 or a Cat 2? If in fact it's a Cat 2, then I say, okay, you better take it easy and you better follow your own advice, Jerry, and that advice is the Kozlowskisms. So if you don't mind, I'd like to quickly go through and give you some idea about, in addition to the 6 steps, the things you ought to be thinking about when making Category 2 decisions. And the first one is take your time when you can and slow down. An example I just gave you earlier about Sarah Jillian Duck, there are times, but they're few and far between, where you're going to have to make a Category 2 decision and you're going to have a limited amount of time. Normally not seconds, but sometimes you're going to have to make a decision within hours. I can remember another decision we had to make on the TOPS executive team where one Friday afternoon in the summer, we received a phone call for an emergency executive meeting with the CEO. And once we were hustled into the conference room, had found out that some of our customers had recently swallowed contaminated hamburger that had metal shavings in them that were cutting up their mouth and tongues. And obviously we needed to that was obviously a Category 2 decision that needed to be made quickly, but it was one that we didn't make in 20 minutes. It was one that we made within hours. So even in a situation like that where people are being hurt, and that's especially a time where you need to follow the 6 steps and to prescribe to Kozlowski's number 1, and that is slow down whenever you can. There's something about being an American that says you need to be the first through the finish line all the time. You've got to be the first one to break the ribbon on the race. And how many times have we heard no one remembers number 2, etc. But when it comes to your personal and professional lives, folks, when it comes to making consistently good Category 2 decisions, the first thing we need to do, the first piece of advice I would give to you is slow down. More often than not, you have far more time than you need to make that big decision. Kozlowski's number 2, piece of advice number 2 is get help. There's also something, especially for younger people and middle managers, that says, I'm going to look weak if I ask for help. I'm telling you right now, you're not. Your boss would rather have you come to his office or her office and ask for a little guidance and help about how to finish that big project that means a lot to the organization than have you do it wrong and then have resources or even people's lives affected by the fact that you didn't get help. So don't worry about that. You can't be in your boss's office every 2 minutes. But if it's a Category 2 decision that your organization has asked you to lead and to help on, and you really can't do it by yourself or with your team, there's nothing wrong at all with getting help. So please remember that and do that. Number 3, as far as Kozlowski's advice, I already talked about it at some length, and that is you need to strip out negative emotion. Once again, we're emotional beings, but don't make decisions based on negative emotion. One of the things, when the CEO hired me at Tops, he was going to hire me to go directly into a beautiful second-story office at 6363 Main Street, where headquarters was, and I said, I can't do that. I don't know anything about supermarkets. I'm a retired Air Force colonel. I need some time in the stores. Be careful what you ask for. He put me in the stores for about 8 months, and I led the largest store in the fleet, 450 employees for quite a few months. What I mean about stripping out negative emotions is I can't tell you how many times I'd be sitting in my office at the store, working on budgets, working on whatever, when the door flies open and somebody's yelling, screaming, pounding on the table, saying you have to do something about this customer, or you have to do something about one of my employees. They're crying, they're ranting, they're raving, they're angry, they're upset. The best thing to do is to have that person calm down, and whatever you do, you don't want to get spun up by that person and go out into the business, whatever your business may be, half-cocked and negatively emotionally charged in making that Category 2. Calm that person down, try to get the facts, and then calmly and coolly go out there and begin to run your 6 steps. The biggie, and you learned it in your MOL class, whether it was President Bush making a decision about whether to go to war in Iraq, whether it was climbing the mountain for Mount Everest, and the rest of the case studies that we chose for you to study. I can tell you right now, more often than not, big-time leaders as well as typical people, they go wrong in making Category 2 decisions because they treat Category 2 decisions as Category 1s. They thoroughly recognize that this is a big deal, it's a big decision to make, they understand it's a big deal, but what do? They revert back to the path of least resistance. It's easy to make a Category 1 decision for most cases. You shoot off the hip, you look at whatever you've done in the past, you hope that you get lucky, but those are the people that fail. You need to realize that it's a Category 1 or Category 2. When you've made the distinction between the two and realize it's a Category 2, you need to use some sort of process, the 6 steps or others, and try to use some of these Kozlowskiisms to guide you through it along the way. And then the last 2 are deciding how to decide in the first place. What sort of methodology can you and do you want to use to solve the problem? Lots and lots of times in my experience, 42 years as a leader, manager, supervisor, and boss, you have not only hours, but you have days or even weeks to solve a Category 2 problem. You know, think about the mistakes you've made in your own personal lives that were Category 2 decisions. Think about whether now if you would have treated whether or not you were going to marry that guy or marry that gal, whether or not you were going to divorce that guy or divorce that gal, and how you're going to go about it. Whether or not you were going to go into credit card debt, buy that house that's overextending your finances. Think about all the decisions, get in that car with that drunk driver. Here in Buffalo, just wiping off a small part of the snow because you're too lazy to take the snow off the back and crack your car out. These are Category 2 decisions that people make mistakes and errors at every day. But if you would have slowed down, if you would have stripped out of negative emotion, and you would have decided how to decide, chances are you'd be in a much better position today in your life. And finally, Kozlowski is number 6, and it's just something that I want to share with you as future executives and current executives out there. Some decisions are just going to be difficult, and they're just going to be unpopular. Get over it. You don't rise as a director, vice president, and eventually CEO in any organization to be friends with all your employees. In a perfect world, everyone admires you, you're put on a pedestal, and life is good, but that doesn't happen very often. More often than not, you are going to make some friends, you are going to make some enemies along the way. The bottom line is get over it. Some decisions you're going to have to make are category twos that are plainly going to be unpopular, but remember, that's why we're making the big bucks. That's why you're in the position you're in right now, and that's one of the benefits of going through this MLL degree here at Medaille, is having the ability to go through a class like MLL 626 and really get the benefit of pausing for just a moment and realizing, maybe, just maybe, I've been making big decisions over the course of my life by shooting off the hip, by being negatively emotionally charged when I did them, and maybe, just maybe, that's one of the reasons I haven't been as successful as I could in making big decisions.
Jerry, thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview. We greatly appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, and I wish you all the best of luck in your future endeavors.
Thank you.